Super Lucky Disaster Man. Chapter 91, Extra, Whitewashing Phase, Elementary School Student Shinigami. 2 years later. Kudo-kun. Now in his final year of high school, Komaeda Nagito looked at what seemed to be an elementary school student with a Shota appearance and pondered, "Is this your ability?" "Of course not." Kudo Shinichi spoke, on the verge of a breakdown. "I was attacked and given some kind of drug. How did things turn out like this?" The story must be told from the beginning of today when he went on a date with Rang at an amusement park. Well, no need to go through the whole process. Simply put, he saw some men in black acting suspiciously and decided to follow them. As a result, he got knocked out and was drugged. When he woke up, he was like this, a kid looking like an elementary schooler. Worse yet, he almost got taken to the police station by some well-meaning people. Thankfully, his survival instincts were strong. He escaped quickly and decided to return home first, but on his way, he ran into Komaeda Nagito. Komaeda Nagito was now a third-year high school student. Last year, Kudo Shinichi also moved up to Taitang High School, reuniting with Komaeda Nagito. Every winter and summer vacation, whenever he wasn't visiting his parents, he interned at the Armed Detective Agency and often ran into Komaeda Nagito. Naturally, their relationship became closer compared to when they were in middle school. Thus, encountering Kudo Shinichi under these unusual circumstances, with his mind in a muddle, the first thing he did was call out to a familiar person. "Komaeda-senpai." Unlike Kudo Shinichi, Komaeda Nagito was just out running an errand. He was buying groceries for the next day's breakfast. Carrying a supermarket bag in his hand, he suddenly heard the childlike voice calling, "Komaeda-senpai." He instinctively turned around. Komaeda Nagito stopped in his tracks, staring at the Shota in front of him, whose clothes were obviously ill-fitting yet whose face seemed vaguely familiar. His mind worked quickly, forming a theory, which prompted his initial question. Of course, Kudo Shinichi didn't want to lie, so he explained everything that happened that day. Though the guess that it might be an ability that had shrunk him was ruled out, it at least confirmed the identity of the child. Komaeda Nagito then squatted down and asked, "Kudo-kun, do you have any plans now?" Plans? Kudo Shinichi, whose brain had been a chaotic mess since waking up, finally thought a bit clearly, "Not yet, but I want to go home first." But now that he looked like this, he wasn't even sure he could reach the front door, yet he couldn't just not go home. Komaeda Nagito quickly drew a map in his head and compared it. "I could take you home. But my place is closer. Would you like to go there first and sort things out?" Kudo Shinichi agreed. Komaeda-senpai was not just his upperclassman in the same school, they were also longtime friends, and he was an auxiliary member of the Armed Detective Agency, well acquainted with President Fukuzawa and the others. Either way, he was a very trustworthy person, and Kudo Shinichi felt assured going to his place. Kudo Shinichi, in his current state, struggled to even walk a step without tripping over his pants. Komaeda Nagito simply picked him up and carried him, asking along the way, "Shouldn't you try to contact Mori-san?" "Ah, right." Kudo Shinichi exclaimed, realizing it. "Senpai, could I borrow your phone for a moment? I want to let Rang know I'm okay." "Sorry." Komaeda Nagito smiled apologetically. "I lost my phone yesterday." Kudo Shinichi. Komaeda Nagito cleared his throat. "You can use the landline at my place." Since he couldn't force Komaeda Nagito to suddenly make a phone appear out of nowhere, Kudo Shinichi just nodded, longing to reach his senpai's place soon. When Komaeda Nagito said his home was closer, he wasn't kidding, it was truly nearby, just around the corner. After they entered the house, Komaeda opened the shoe cabinet and let out an "ah." Kudo Shinichi, being sharp, looked over immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Komaeda Nagito pulled out a pair of slippers for Kudo Shinichi, then headed towards the living room. "Do you want something to drink?" "Water is fine." "Senpai, can I borrow your phone?" With permission granted, Kudo Shinichi hurriedly put on the slippers and headed to the table with the landline phone. Unfortunately, the call didn't go through, and when he tried calling Rank's office, it was a busy signal. Regretfully, he thought he would try again later, hanging up and heading toward the living room. Once his focus shifted from himself, he began to hear small, fragmented noises coming from the room. It's Kudo-kun. How come, a child? Kudo Shinichi froze for a moment, picked up his pant legs, and hurried into the living room, discovering someone unexpected. Dazai Osamu. Indeed, sitting on the sofa, looking up at and chatting with Komaeda-senpai, who was holding a cup, was none other than Dazai Osamu, the former executive of the Port Mafia who had made headlines 2 years ago when he went missing. The guy lazily waved at Kudo Shinichi after being spotted. Oh, Kudo-kun, long time no see. Kudo Shinichi was exasperated. Why are you here? His eyes turned to Komaeda Nagito, and he recalled what he heard back then when Komaeda-senpai mentioned not being able to reach Dazai-kun while working at the armed detective agency. After that, Komaeda-senpai never brought up Dazai Osamu again. Kudo Shinichi thought losing touch might have been a sore spot, so he never brought up Dazai again. But now, seeing this scene, it seemed that they had indeed gotten back in touch, at some point. Ahaha. Komaeda Nagito, holding his cup, had a slightly troubled expression. Sorry, Kudo-kun, I just found out Dazai-kun was here when I got back. Kudo Shinichi instantly recalled Komaeda Nagito's reaction upon opening the shoe cabinet. So that's it, he must have realized the slippers were used. Kudo Shinichi sighed and walked over with a clattering sound. No worries, this is Senpai's house after all. Of course, it was up to Senpai to decide who could come over. Dazai Osamu waved at Kudo Shinichi, who frowned, full of question marks. Let's first determine if it's an ability or not. Komaeda Nagito kindly explained, if it's an ability that transformed you, solving it would be much easier. Kudo Shinichi pondered and walked over, letting Dazai Osamu pat his head as if checking a watermelon. Is that enough? Kudo Shinichi said, trying to be patient. Dazai Osamu withdrew his hand. It's not an ability. Tell me about the people in black you encountered. Despite his dissatisfaction with Dazai Osamu, Kudo Shinichi acknowledged the man's abilities. Given that Dazai Osamu was once a Port Mafia executive, he was likely more knowledgeable about such underground organizations. Maybe he even knew something, so Kudo described the people in black he saw. Initially, Dazai Osamu was just listening as if for entertainment, but then his smile turned peculiar. This description sounds like... Kudo Shinichi hurriedly asked. Dazai-san, do you know them? I think I do, Dazai Osamu said thoughtfully. The tall one is called Jin, and the shorter one is Vodka. Kudo Shinichi's spirit lifted. What organization are they from? Those aren't their real names, right? They sound like code names. Wait a minute, using alcohol as code names, why does that sound familiar? Komaeda Nagito coughed. Actually, I've probably seen those two before. Kudo Shinichi exchanged a glance with Komaeda Nagito. Both recalled the time, 3 years ago, when Komaeda Nagito had stayed in a hotel and encountered someone named Jin from the neighboring room. The neighboring room had originally been occupied by Furuya Rei and Morofushi Hiramitsu, 2 undercover Japanese police officers. After Morofushi Hiramitsu's cover was blown, the organization sent people to investigate where the undercover officer had stayed, coincidentally encountering Komaeda Nagito. Komaeda Nagito had recounted this to Kudo Shinichi during school. I see, so that's it. Dazai Osamu said, they belong to an international criminal organization, and the drug. In that case, the research division. Kudo Shinichi impatiently asked, Dazai-san, do you know where I can find the antidote for the drug I took? As far as I know, this is supposed to be a lethal drug. Dazai Osamu shrugged, you're lucky to be alive. As for an antidote. Kudo Shinichi felt his spirits drop. Komaeda Nagito thought for a moment, then asked, Kudo-kun, would you like to commission the armed detective agency for help? Ah, that could work. Kudo Shinichi perked up again, I'll call them right now. Wait, no need to run that far. Kudo Shinichi was confused, but we don't even have a... Before he could finish, Kudo Shinichi watched as Komaeda Nagito casually reached over, took Dazai Osamu's phone out of his pocket, unlocked it with ease, and started dialing. Kudo Shinichi. Ah, this. He instinctively looked at Dazai Osamu, who seemed completely unbothered, as if this was perfectly normal. Even if they are friends, is it really okay to casually take someone's phone like that? Especially unlocking the password. Dazai Osamu, even if he wants to turn over a new leaf and be a good person, he used to be part of the mafia, right? His phone definitely has a lot of secrets. And yet, just giving it to Komaeda-senpai like that? For a moment, Kudo Shinichi even wondered if there was something wrong with his own definition of friendship, and he wrestled with the thought of whether he would be willing to give Rang the password to his phone. President? Komaeda Nagito made the call directly to his senior, Fukuzawa Yukichi. No, I didn't run into any problems, it's Kudo-kun. Yes, he's here with me right now. I'll let him take the call. Kudo Shinichi said, put it on speaker. If it was just Senpai's phone, maybe it wouldn't matter. But this was Dazai Osamu's phone. What if Senpai took it without permission, and now he had to pay the price? Komaeda Nagito turned on the speakerphone and placed the phone beside him, letting Kudo Shinichi and Fukuzawa Yukichi converse while he himself continued talking to Dazai Osamu. A little while later, Kudo Shinichi finished speaking with Fukuzawa Yukichi. Since Edogawa Ranpo wasn't at the office at the moment, they decided to wait until he returned to continue the conversation. Kudo Shinichi handed the phone back to Dazai Osamu and said, "Thank you, Dazai-san. If you know anything else about this organization, could you share it with me?" Wouldn't that be a bit improper? Dazai Osamu said with a cheerful smile. "I'm currently in this organization, you know." Kudo Shinichi's movements froze. "Ha! I thought you'd completely turned over a new leaf. Why did you leave one criminal organization only to join another?" Chapter 91 End. Chapter 92, Extra, Whitewashing Phase, Self-Sustaining Dazai Osamu. Kudo Shinichi looked at Dazai Osamu, his pupils shook. Dazai Osamu calmly reached out to take back his phone, as if nothing had happened, and asked, "What do you plan to do now?" What to do now? Because he instinctively felt that the armed detective agency could definitely solve his troubles, Kudo Shinichi was now completely calm, and began to seriously consider his next steps. Dazai Osamu currently wore an expression that said he was just there for the show, making it obvious that he wouldn't help. So, eliminating Dazai Osamu as an option. Wait a minute. Recalling what he had heard during his internship in Yokohama, a bunch of tales about Dazai Osamu's betrayals, Kudo Shinichi suspiciously looked at Dazai Osamu. "Excuse me, Dazai-san, could I know how long you've been in this organization?" "Sure, almost 2 years now. If you count it properly, I've only officially been in the Port Mafia for 3 years. Time flies, doesn't it?" Kudo Shinichi. Alright, in other words, this organization is really difficult. Not to mention anything else, Dazai Osamu's judgment certainly carried weight. If he could stay in the organization for that long, it couldn't be underestimated. That conclusion was wrong. 2 years ago, Dazai Osamu received a mission, uncovered the secrets of this organization and, ideally, uproot this transnational illegal group. The Japanese government had already sent enough agents who failed. The FBI also used investigating this organization as an excuse to come in and out of Japan all the time. Everyone was frustrated to the point of gnashing their teeth. In fact, they could have just sent a few ability users, and maybe there could have been some progress. Unfortunately, the special division was already overwhelmed, and even with Sakaguchi Ongo back, they were working tirelessly every night. The workload was such that even with 10 more people, they wouldn't be able to restore their regular schedule, let alone assign anyone to help the police or the Metropolitan Police Department deal with this organization. As for ability users outside the division, if their abilities didn't fit, then they were out. And for those who were suitable, those who had skills, experience, and status, why would they listen to the government? There were indeed many ability users who, when recruited by the government, didn't dare refuse, but most of these people tried hard to pretend to be ordinary, blending into everyday society. Sending them as undercover agents would be like sending them to their deaths, and the Japanese government wasn't that heartless. At this point, a wild Dazai Osamu appeared. To be clear, although Dazai Osamu's records required some ability-aided cleaning, managed by the Special Division, this didn't mean that Dazai Osamu was working for the Special Division. His recommendation letter meant that if there was anything suitable, it could be arranged for Dazai Osamu, until his accumulated contributions were enough to wipe his record clean. But even so, Dazai Osamu was, after all, an ability user, even if his ability was nullification, so the Special Division had priority. As a result, the Japanese police, in a rush over this distillery case, requested assistance. Sakaguchi Ango, although he had been unilaterally declared cut off by Dazai Osamu, still felt immense guilt towards him. Whenever he had the opportunity, he wanted to make up for it. Considering the trivial matters the Special Division was dealing with, Sakaguchi Ango privately wished for Dazai Osamu's journey to whitewash his record to be easier. Since most organizations were composed of ordinary people, they should be more suitable. Thus, after some maneuvering, he agreed to the police's request. Dazai Osamu successfully received the undercover mission. But even Sakaguchi Ango didn't expect that Dazai Osamu would drag out this mission for 2 whole years. When he initially joined the distillery, Dazai Osamu used the excuse that he had just escaped and joined them, so he hadn't gained their trust yet and couldn't provide any intel. After a while, when the police started suspecting he might be slacking off, Dazai Osamu suddenly produced several pieces of vital intelligence, allowing the Japanese police to prevent a few incidents almost comparable to the collapse of Tokyo Tower. Because of the distillery's extremely loose structure, the police often gave Dazai Osamu a few tasks to see if he could help whenever possible, making it seem like Dazai Osamu was incredibly busy, though, in reality, he was quite leisurely. Once the distillery lifted their surveillance on him, Dazai Osamu became even more free, even successfully mixing into Komaeda Nagito's household, leading a life no different from before. Komaeda Nagito hadn't expected Dazai Osamu to be able to return so soon, so he curiously asked, "What exactly is your mission to whitewash your record?" "Find out this organization's, let's just call it the distillery, leader's identity and goals, and if possible, bring it down." Dazai Osamu told Komaeda Nagito everything without holding back, cheerfully betraying those above. "It's a job that's perfect for slacking off." That assessment was quite delicate. Komaeda Nagito raised an eyebrow. "Slacking off? As long as this organization remains active, I can stay in an undercover mission status," Dazai Osamu said with a smile. "Occasionally tossing out some intel counts as a contribution. There's so much in this organization that can be exploited." In fact, Dazai Osamu's actions were incredibly cunning. He sold the Japanese government information that seemed very dangerous, urgent, and required immediate intervention. In fact, some of it was fabricated by him. Yes, he, Dazai Osamu, an undercover agent, during his initial evaluation at the distillery, based on their needs, carefully planned a highly feasible plan and submitted it to his evaluator. The evaluator was astonished upon seeing the plan and immediately escalated it to the action group led by Jin. After Jin reported it to the boss, the organization gathered intelligent individuals for a discussion and concluded it was worth a try. Dazai Osamu, who was highly proficient in psychology, had crafted the plan to appear quite ordinary, yet anyone reading it seemed to hear a voice in their head saying, "Original price 10,000. Now not 100. Not 99. Only 98. Don't miss out. Don't miss out." That sense of urgency made everyone feel that not implementing the plan would be a huge loss. Undercover agent Furuyare, who was also present during the discussion, could clearly see the plan's feasibility. Although there was no overly enthusiastic language, he almost forgot his own stance, feeling an impulse to execute the plan, as if success was inevitable. Fortunately, he managed to calm himself down in the nick of time. However, Furuyare couldn't openly oppose the plan. After all, there were no apparent flaws. If he showed unusual resistance, he would be suspected of having ill intentions towards the organization, so he anxiously sought an opportunity to leak the intel. Because the plan seemed so critical, both Jin and the evaluator kept their mouths tightly shut. Aside from the three of them, no one knew who had come up with the plan, so Furuya-Rei didn't even know that he had almost been trapped by Dazai-Osamu. Luckily, Furuya-Rei wasn't able to find an opportunity to leak the information, nor was he discovered as an undercover agent, but the plan still failed. The reason, of course, wasn't a flaw in Dazai-Osamu's plan. Instead, the organization had a traitor. At least, that's how Jin saw it. In reality, Dazai-Osamu had sold that intel as his contribution to the Japanese police, along with a friendly suggestion that the Japanese police could use the FBI, who were already in Japan, to handle it. Furthermore, he conveniently shifted the blame for the leaked intel onto the loyal and dedicated members of the organization, prompting Jin, who specialized in eliminating traitors, to kill them all. This whole maneuver could be described as self-sustaining. Later, when Furuya-Rei managed to leak his own information, and the police compared it with what Dazai-Osamu had provided, they realized how impressive Dazai-Osamu was. Not only had he transmitted such crucial intel in a timely manner, but he had also managed to get the FBI to work for them and even eliminated several core members of the organization, making it a great deal for the police. As a result, the police gave Dazai-Osamu a very high evaluation, thinking that if he made a few more significant contributions, he could clear his record. In Jin's eyes, Dazai-Osamu's plan still had a high success rate, but every time they were about to do something big, there was always a traitor causing trouble. Of course, he also suspected Dazai-Osamu, but having a traitor show up at those times actually fit the logic quite well. Because trivial matters aren't necessary, only things like this are truly worth a traitor exposing themselves. Thus, the bigger the plan, the higher the chances of failure. Everyone thinks it's not a problem, but only the traitor's constant sabotaging makes Jin genuinely exhausted. Dazai-Osamu even faked sincerity as he said, "Hey, has your organization ever managed to pull it off without a hitch? Back when I was at the Port Mafia, plans never failed. Compared to this, I'd say it's all because your organization has too many traitors. So I'm telling you, just let me keep an eye on everyone more often. I'd love to help spot the traitor for you, okay? I think my eyes are much sharper than yours." Though Jin suspected Dazai-Osamu, he couldn't do much when the boss always felt this plan or that plan could work. Yes, Dazai-Osamu managed to get the boss's contact information. Every time there was a plan, he directly sent it to the boss, and then the boss would get convinced and assign Jin to carry it out. Getting the boss's inbox and giving it to related ability users with the intent to discarding the distillery made capturing the mastermind behind all this much easier. However, switching missions didn't guarantee this level of information advantage again, and such a self-sufficient method would not continue for long. Thus, Dazai-Osamu decided to conceal the intel, planning to farm as much credit as possible from the distillery before releasing this information. This wave could be described as, can't drain the pond and catch all the fish. Because of that, the Japanese police even felt that Dazai-Osamu was really incredible, as if he were 10 undercover agents rolled into one, almost prompting Furuya-Rei to be recalled. Sakaguchi Ango, who was familiar with Dazai-Osamu, actually had his doubts. He thought Dazai-Osamu was taking too long on this mission, but he couldn't really voice his suspicion, so he just kept it to himself. 2 years, Kudo Shinichi was frustrated. A massive trove of intel was right before him, but he couldn't use it. How painful is that? Dazai-Osamu also sighed. That's right, 2 years already. Time really flies. I do quite like this organization. Easily gaining credit, with an organization that brings benefits right to your doorstep, who wouldn't love that? Komaeda Nagito coughed lightly. Actually, if you want information on this organization, I could introduce you to someone. He meant Furuya-Rei, who was still undercover. Before Kudo Shinichi could respond, Dazai-Osamu's phone rang. Komaeda Nagito casually grabbed it and checked the caller ID, then put it on speaker. Hello? Edogawa Ranpoa's voice came through the phone, directly exposing Dazai-Osamu's loafing. Komaeda, isn't this Dazai-Osamu's phone? Hello? Are you listening? It's been 2 years. Shouldn't it be about time to make a move? Chapter 92 End. Chapter 93 Extra, Whitewashing Phase, Jin's PTSD. When Kudo Shinichi initially heard Edogawa Ranpoa's voice, he wanted to say something, but after hearing the latter part, he immediately turned around to glare at Dazai Osamu. After all, he was Edogawa Ranpoa's assistant for a while. Even though it was only during break periods, the accumulated time was enough for him to understand Ranpoa's speaking habits and to easily interpret his words. Therefore, as soon as he heard it, he understood. Dazai Osamu's goal in going to that organization probably wasn't simple. If he wasn't mistaken, Dazai Osamu had gone there as an undercover agent. Sure enough, Dazai Osamu responded in a rather subtle way, "This doesn't have anything to do with you, Ranpo-san, does it?" Kudo Shinichi was baffled. Ranpo-san? This form of address. Why did Dazai Osamu seem so familiar with Ranpo-san? Edogawa Ranpo knowing Dazai Osamu didn't surprise him too much. After all, Komaeda Nagito, the president, and Edogawa Ranpo had pretty good relationships. In fact, last summer, Komaeda Nagito did his assignments at the Armed Detective Agency office, and he didn't really hide his relationship with Dazai Osamu. Everyone was familiar with it to that level, so it was normal for them to know each other. But knowing each other and being familiar were two different matters. Ranpo-san had always spoken rather bluntly, but even Dazai Osamu seemed to be talking in a familiar tone. Even with Komaeda-senpai as the intermediary, Kudo Shinichi couldn't figure out why these two were so close. The Armed Detective Agency's activities mostly stayed within Yokohama, and Dazai Osamu had offended the Yokohama local powerhouse, the Port Mafia, so he presumably wouldn't return to Yokohama that often. How did they end up like this? If they were really this familiar, then when he worked at the Armed Detective Agency, why did no one mention Dazai Osamu when talking about the Port Mafia? Kudo Shinichi instinctively started spinning scenarios in his mind, investigating fiercely, trying to dig something useful out of his own memories. The conclusion was that there was nothing. He thought everyone was being considerate of Komaeda-senpai's connection with Dazai Osamu and didn't want to bring it up. Kudo Shinichi looked to Komaeda Nagito for help, trying to get a hint from his reliable senior. Komaeda Nagito didn't notice Kudo Shinichi's gaze, simply coughing lightly. Ranpo-san, the client is Kudo-kun. Stop dragging Dazai-kun in, let's get down to business. I'm solving Kudo's problem. Edogawa Ranpo replied confidently. Isn't directly asking Dazai Osamu the simplest way? Kudo Shinichi couldn't help but interject, Dazai-san doesn't want to say anything. Edogawa Ranpo lightly said, he wants to see you struggle, so of course he won't talk. This is when you need a trump card, Dazai-kun. The entrance test is about solving Kudo's problem. If you can't solve it, your recommendation letter is useless. What? Kudo Shinichi was shocked. Dazai-san is also joining the Armed Detective Agency. That's how it was planned 2 years ago. Whether he has changed his mind now is uncertain. Komaeda Nagito replied. Dazai Osamu's voice turned dismissive, Ranpo-san, ruining someone's fun is really too much. Ha ha ha, Ranpo-sama does whatever he wants. The president would also approve of this test. Edogawa Ranpo said smugly, you just have to answer, yes or no. Tisk. Dazai Osamu clicked his tongue. Let's talk later. Edogawa Ranpo wasn't bothered by this vague response and nonchalantly said, then I'll leave it to you. Over and out. The call ended. Kudo Shinichi. They were supposed to solve his problem, yet he barely managed to speak with Edogawa Ranpo for a few sentences throughout. What a chaotic mess. He took a deep breath, sat down on the sofa across from them, organized his thoughts, and suddenly spoke. Dazai-san, are you working undercover in this organization? Dazai Osamu, you guess. Kudo Shinichi. You guess, is that even a proper answer? I'm talking to you seriously here. Originally, Kudo Shinichi wanted to launch into a lengthy detective analysis, but now he lost heart. Meanwhile, Dazai Osamu continued his performance with Komaeda Nagito. Everyone else's test wasn't this difficult. Komaeda-kun, do you think Ranpo-san is biased against me? Although the things I did in the past were indeed worth being judged for. Ah, as expected, once you've done a bad thing, there's no way to go back. The heavy, green tea style almost made Kudo Shinichi spit out his lunch. However, Komaeda Nagito seemed used to it, showing no reaction to Dazai Osamu's tone and even picked up on the main point to encourage him. I think if Ranpo-san made this the test to join the agency, he probably thought it wouldn't be too difficult for Dazai-kun. Ranpo-san obviously appreciates Dazai-kun's value. I believe Dazai-kun can complete the task effortlessly. After saying this, Komaeda Nagito calculated some dates, as mentioned earlier this year. Would you want to get it done before summer break, Dazai-kun? We could intern together then. Dazai Osamu, who had previously appeared frail, changed his tone and spoke seriously. Actually, it should be about time. Finishing the entrance test along the way isn't bad. Kudo Shinichi. So, his thoughts as the victim don't matter at all, do they? So how do you plan to help me, Dazai-san? Kudo Shinichi tried to control the progression of events. It was a habit of a detective to be involved. He felt uncomfortable when he knew nothing. You've mentioned before that this was originally a poison, and my transformation is just an accident, right? So there's no way to just make an antidote. Dazai Osamu said in a relaxed tone, there's definitely no antidote, but we could try to get the technical personnel to develop one. Kudo Shinichi. Meeting Komaeda Nagito just led to the entrance test. It seemed like more trouble, but when Dazai Osamu went to meet the organization's members, his expression looked rather joyful. Don't let how reluctant he seemed in front of Kudo Shinichi fool you. The entrance test really wasn't much for him. If worst came to worst, he could always find some make-people-old ability user and use them to fake it. After all, a make-people-young ability user was good at hiding, but he had heard of the make-people-old ones. And as long as he managed to turn Kudo Shinichi back to around 17 years old, that was enough to take the roundabout route to victory. Hennessy. Jin, at the meeting place, smoking a cigarette, had vodka beside him. When he saw Dazai Osamu, he flicked the cigarette away, crushed it underfoot, and aimed a gun at Dazai Osamu. You're late. Where have you been? Dazai Osamu ignored the gun, continuing to move forward. I have emotional needs too. I just went to release some steam. Does the organization care about that? Jin gave a cold laugh. The organization doesn't care who you go to see, but you're late. If you're putting it that way, Bourbon is also late, Dazai Osamu said. Immediately, a voice came from the darkness. I am not. Bourbon, real name Furuya Rei, was technically in the same faction as Dazai Osamu, both undercover for the Japanese police. Slowly, he emerged from the depths of a narrow alleyway. I heard something about being late from quite far away. And there's still half an hour left. Jin. Half an hour? The mission has been delayed, Bourbon said. Didn't Hennessy notify you? Hennessy was Dazai Osamu's codename. Quite coincidentally, the codename assigned to him was the very first bottle of liquor that Komaeda Nagito had picked when they drank together. Dazai Osamu was rather satisfied with it. Although for someone like Dazai Osamu, having or not having a codename didn't make much of a difference, since those who interacted with him frequently knew very well that his real name was Dazai Osamu. That name was too well known in the underworld. Still, he insisted everyone call him by his codename, causing everyone believes he truly loved the Hennessy brand. I didn't receive any notice, Jin said skeptically. What's going on? Explain. Dazai Osamu sighed. It's just a normal mission delay. Does this really need an explanation? Why was Bourbon the only one informed? Vodka saw Jin's forehead veins bulge and quickly added, shouldn't something like this be informed to everyone? Because when I decided to delay the time, Bourbon just happened to call. Of course, it's necessary to inform if it's earlier, but delaying it by half an hour doesn't really need that, right? You were all going to arrive early anyway, or are you saying there's something urgent that you have to do during that half an hour? Dazai-Osamu threw the words back. Besides, am I not informing you now? Or does your understanding ability have issues, needing several hours to grasp something this simple? Jin. Vodka, Aniki, calm down. Please calm down. Dazai-Osamu, this guy liking to look for something to do when there's nothing is nothing new. Aniki, you better get used to it sooner. Even the boss says that talented people tend to have a bigger ego, so just endure it. Furuya-Rei watched as Jin was left speechless from anger, and couldn't help but feel a little satisfied. He knew Dazai-Osamu was undercover for their side, and the two of them had worked together a few times. For example, Dazai-Osamu would write a plan, and Furuya-Rei's side would cooperate by taking intelligence from the police and giving it back to the organization, helping him build trust within the organization. Of course, Furuya-Rei didn't yet know about Dazai-Osamu's habit of double-crossing everyone. If he did, he definitely wouldn't be so pleased. Just joking a little. Dazai-Osamu said insincerely, and then added, actually, I found Akai Shuichi. Jin immediately calmed down. Akai Shuichi is back in Japan? Yes. Actually, it was very easy for Dazai-Osamu to contact Akai Shuichi. He could have just called. They had exchanged contact information back in the day when Komaeda Nagito was hospitalized in the US. But this was something Akai Shuichi certainly wouldn't have mentioned to Jin. So this information was obtained by Dazai-Osamu through other channels, and it had been in his hands for a while. He simply hadn't found it necessary to say anything until now. Now that he had been late, and with the entrance test, Akai Shuichi just came to mind. I want to see if I can lure out Akai Shuichi in the process. Dazai-Osamu said, I remember you once said that Akai Shuichi has a girlfriend in the organization. Yes, Mieno Akemi. Jin frowned. Are you planning to use her as bait? Is that not allowed? Jin thought for a moment. It's fine, she's just a low-ranking member. Furuya-Rei felt a bit uneasy. Mieno Akemi was his childhood friend, something Dazai-Osamu didn't know, so he didn't dare to say much. He just hoped he could privately inquire about her situation later. Does she have any relatives in the organization? Dazai-Osamu knowingly asked. She has a younger sister, in the research division. It was easy to verify this kind of information, so Jin didn't hide it. Why do you ask? Dazai-Osamu smiled. Well, I have a plan. Jin. Out of 10 of Dazai-Osamu's plans, 6 involved dealing with undercover agents. Even though he enjoyed eliminating traitors, those words, I have a plan, still gave him PTSD. There were just too many rats. If this continued, even he couldn't help but feel a bit suspicious about the organization. Chapter 93 End. Chapter 94, Extra, Whitewashing Phase, The Walking Shinigami. As an undercover agent, Dazai-Osamu had his own mission, so he didn't stay long before leaving behind Kudo Shinichi and Komaeda Nagito. Before leaving, Dazai-Osamu thoughtfully gave Kudo Shinichi some advice: don't go home for now, and try not to let too many people know about the situation. But you should still tell your parents a little. Hearing this, Kudo Shinichi couldn't help but think deeply. Although Dazai-Osamu didn't want to say more, he did mention that it was an international crime organization. At the time of the case, the 2 men in black were also there, and they knew his name. He wasn't an anonymous person, so they could very well be interested enough to check his background. If they found out that someone who was supposed to be dead was actually alive, something that was originally nothing could easily become something. Kudo Shinichi could barely protect himself, so he naturally didn't want to implicate Rang. After thinking for a moment, he asked Komaeda Nagito to call Mori Rang again, telling her that he had to go abroad temporarily due to urgent matters, and that someone would later handle the school leave procedures for him. Komaeda Nagito didn't refuse, but he did ask curiously, Aren't you going to call Yukiko-ne-san as well? Yes, Komaeda Nagito referred to Kudo Shinichi's mother as Yukiko-ne-san, something Kudo Yukiko herself requested. Since Kudo Shinichi didn't have many friends, Kudo's parents had exchanged contact information with Komaeda Nagito. For now, let's not worry my parents. Kudo Shinichi said optimistically, perhaps this will be resolved soon. Although he had some reservations about Dazai Osamu, he trusted the abilities of the infamous former port mafia executive. Moreover, from what Edogawa Ranpo said, Kudo Shinichi felt that, for Dazai Osamu, this was probably a small matter. Komaeda Nagito thought the same, so he didn't argue further and called Mori Rang as Kudo Shinichi requested. Mori Rang was not willing to accept this explanation. But why can't Shinichi tell me himself? I ran into him on the street. His phone had run out of battery, so he asked me to let you know. He should be on the plane by now. Komaeda Nagito followed the script and explained, he'll probably contact you later. Mori Rang. Although it sounded quite coincidental, considering Komaeda-senpai's luck. Mori Rang couldn't find any point to argue with. It seemed like anything could happen to her senpai. After settling things with Mori Rang, who had been left halfway through her date, Kudo Shinichi let out a sigh of relief. While Komaeda Nagito was making the call, Kudo Shinichi was lost in thought. Once Komaeda Nagito hung up, Kudo Shinichi spoke seriously. Senpai. Kudo Shinichi asked earnestly, can I stay at your place? His parents had already moved to America. Although his neighbor, Professor Agasa, had practically watched him grow up and was very close to him, the more Kudo Shinichi thought about it, the more he felt it was better to involve as few people as possible. Since Komaeda-senpai already knew, he decided to shamelessly impose on Komaeda-senpai a bit more. Komaeda Nagito had no objections. After all, back when he was struggling to find a place to stay in Tokyo, he had stayed at Kudo Shinichi's house, so now was just the right time to return the favor. The previous place had been blown up by Mimic, and now there was a new one, with plenty of empty rooms. Having one more person like Kudo Shinichi around wouldn't make much difference. Getting Komaeda Nagito's permission, Kudo Shinichi sighed in relief, but he then felt a bit guilty. He wasn't lacking in EQ, and he understood that Dazai Osamu's advice before leaving was essentially to tell him to leave quickly, not to burden Komaeda-senpai. Previously, Dazai Osamu already didn't like him, and Kudo Shinichi believed he could fully understand Dazai Osamu's intentions, but after much thought, he still made this decision. He could only hope that by the next time Dazai Osamu arrived, everything would be resolved, allowing him to return home without facing Dazai Osamu's glare. However, there was now a new problem. If I have to call Rang, wouldn't she immediately notice my voice? This problem was once again handled by Komaeda Nagito, who found Professor Agasa, Kudo Shinichi's neighbor, and asked him to make a voice changer device. To be precise, it was still in the planning stages, since it required some time to complete. However, getting non-prescription eyeglasses was quick, so Kudo Shinichi could finally go outside. Japan was small, and Tokyo was even smaller, so the probability of running into someone who knew him from childhood was high. Without a disguise, he really didn't dare go out. Once the disguise equipment was ready, Kudo Shinichi was able to go outside again. One day, he even went with Komaeda Nagito, who had just finished school, to a restaurant for dinner. After ordering, Kudo Shinichi instinctively scanned the restaurant, analyzing the professions of the patrons in his mind, a detective's habit. Suddenly, his gaze froze, and his movements became stiff. Komaeda Nagito asked curiously, Kudo-kun? No. Kudo Shinichi whispered, Senpai, don't call me by my name, Rang is here. Ah. Komaeda Nagito restrained the urge to turn around, sighing, honestly, telling her the truth wouldn't be a big deal, right? She doesn't seem like someone who would go around talking about it. Kudo Shinichi shook his head. I don't want to worry Rang. Alright. Komaeda Nagito stopped trying to persuade him, but if I can't call you Kudo-kun, what should I call you? That was a good question. The waiter came to pour their drinks, and both of them fell silent. Suddenly, Komaeda Nagito's newly bought phone emitted a loud noise, startling the waiter, who accidentally spilled the water onto the table. Ah, sorry. The waiter quickly grabbed a cloth to clean up. Komaeda Nagito awkwardly picked up his phone to mute it. It's alright, my phone scared you. Sorry, it's new, and I haven't adjusted all the settings yet. Ah, it seems I accidentally set an alarm without knowing it. Hahaha, how strange. As he spoke, Komaeda Nagito stood up. The water had spilled onto his pants. Since it would be strange to wipe his pants in public, he decided to go to the restroom to clean up. Kudo Shinichi helped the waiter dry the table, then sat back down, praying that the commotion hadn't attracted Rang's attention. A little while later, Komaeda Nagito returned, looking rather peculiar, as if he was both happy and conflicted. Senpai? Kudo Shinichi asked cautiously, did something happen? Komaeda Nagito hesitated. How should I put this? There might be a dead body in the restroom. Kudo Shinichi. Kudo-kun, do you want to go take a look? Komaeda Nagito looked excited. It might be a murder case. I'm really looking forward to seeing you solve a case in person. Call the police first. But if we call the police, they'll notify the owner to seal off the scene, right? With your current situation, you wouldn't be able to investigate the scene. Isn't that quite despairing? Komaeda Nagito spoke with apparent concern for Kudo Shinichi, but every word made Kudo Shinichi's stomach churn. Kudo Shinichi sighed. Alright, senpai, you call the police, and I'll go take a look. With that, Kudo Shinichi rushed to the restroom. Once Kudo Shinichi got to work, Komaeda Nagito calmly called the police and then notified the restaurant owner, as the police had requested. The restaurant owner, pale-faced, ran to the restroom, ignoring the young-looking Kudo Shinichi sneaking around, and confirmed the body in the stall. In the end, he could only comply with the police's request to seal the restaurant. This was clearly going to upset the customers, especially those who were about to leave but were told they couldn't because someone had died, causing some tempers to flare. Are you accusing me of murder? The waiter tried to calm the man down. Please, sir, that's not what we mean at all. Then why can't we leave? We have nothing to do with any murder. Besides, the killer might already be gone. Another customer also shouted, we still have things to do. Who's responsible if we're delayed? Where are the police? Why aren't they here yet? They should be arriving any moment now. Originally, the customers were enjoying their meal, unaware they wouldn't be allowed to leave. Upon hearing the commotion, they also began to get nervous, and they all started questioning the waiter about what was happening. Before the situation got out of hand, the police finally arrived. Although everyone was very dissatisfied, the police's words still held some weight. The customers eventually reluctantly returned to their seats, waiting for the police investigation. The crime scene had been sealed off, and Kudo Shinichi had also been driven out. At this moment, he stood beside Komaeda Nagito, lost in thought. What's up, Kudo-kun? Komaeda Nagito asked, his eyes sparkling. Have you found the culprit? Shush. Kudo Shinichi said nervously. Rang is still around. Call me Edogawa. Komaeda Nagito smiled. Kudo. Ahem, Edogawa-kun really likes Ranpo-san, doesn't he? Kudo Shinichi blushed slightly. Is this really the time to talk about that? True. Alright, back to the matter at hand then. Has Edogawa-kun discovered anything? Komaeda Nagito looked at Kudo Shinichi with expectant eyes. Kudo Shinichi shook his head. I figured out the method, but I still can't determine the culprit. We'll probably have new findings after the police questioning. Komaeda Nagito nodded thoughtfully. At this moment, the police, who had finally quieted the scene, loudly asked, who was the first to discover the body? Komaeda Nagito stood up. That was me. The officer turned to look at him and suddenly fell silent. This caught the attention of Inspector Megure, who was still in the dining area talking to Mori Kogoro. When he noticed his subordinate's sudden silence, he curiously turned to look as well, and also fell silent. Mori Kogoro, confused, looked left and right. What's going on? It's nothing, Inspector Megure said with a complicated expression. It's just that this kid looks familiar. His subordinate, Takagi Wataru, also nodded in sympathy. Komaeda-kun, Takagi said with a subtle tone, we meet again. This kid had been a suspect so many times that even counting on both hands wasn't enough, not to mention other incidents. Why is he always at the crime scene? Is he cursed or something? Chapter 94 End. Chapter 95 Extra, Whitewashing Phase, The Helpful Komaeda Nagito. Although he could understand the subtle expressions of those familiar police officers, Komaeda Nagito still chose to ignore them. He smiled and greeted, long time no see, Detective Takagi. Originally, everyone present were all pitiful people trapped inside the shop. Mori Kogoro aside, once Komaeda Nagito, this nobody, was greeted, combined with the complicated expressions of the police, some people ended up misunderstanding. Whatever anyone else thought in their minds, at least they kept their mouths shut, but Mori Kogoro took the opportunity to ask Inspector Megure, who stood beside him, is this kid a frequent? Mori Rang immediately understood her father's unspoken words. He's suspecting that a person familiar to the police officers might be a repeat offender. She hurriedly tugged at her father's sleeve, and even though Komaeda Nagito couldn't hear from afar, she still gave an apologetic look, then explained, no, he's just an unlucky constitution. Yes, just an unlucky constitution. Unlucky constitution. Mori Kogoro looked puzzled. Wait, Rang, do you know him? He's my senpai. He's also quite close to Shinichi. Mori Kogoro's expression immediately turned fierce. Oh, that brat, huh? Inspector Megure also understood and coughed. That kid, how should I put it, he always shows up in strange situations, but until now he's always been innocent. Of course, just because he was innocent before doesn't mean he is now. We'll enforce the law fairly. Why am I explaining all this to you, Kogoro? You're also a suspect right now. Mori Kogoro. Though there was a slight interruption, the first round of suspect screening proceeded normally. Very soon, those who had been to the bathroom and those who hadn't were separated, and the ones with no suspicion were allowed to leave. Actually, it's possible the culprit has already left, said Mori Kogoro, who, despite being cleared of suspicion, still remained. Honestly, couldn't they just install some cameras? Just as Kudo Shinichi was about to say something, he glanced at his own much shorter height compared to Mori Rang, remembering in time that he wasn't supposed to talk, and grudgingly closed his mouth. Komaeda Nagito noticed Kudo Shinichi's hesitation and leaned down to whisper, do you want to say something? The culprit didn't leave. Based on the bleeding condition of the wound and the victim's sighting entering the bathroom, Kudo Shinichi seemed to have found an outlet, and eagerly babbled his deductions to Komaeda Nagito, finally feeling a bit of relief. Ah, it's really frustrating to hold back. When can he return to his original form? In his current state, there's no way to conduct proper investigations. After all, no one pays attention to what a child says. Komaeda Nagito listened with a smile and asked eagerly, do you know who the culprit is now? I still need to observe more. The police thought similarly. Komaeda-kun. Detective Takagi walked over with his notebook, inquiring, can you tell us how you found the body? Of course. Komaeda Nagito said, I got water on me, so I went to the bathroom to clean up a bit. While I was pulling out some toilet paper, I suddenly heard a strange noise. I went inside, and in the farthest stall, there was someone covered in blood sitting on the toilet. Wait. Detective Takagi scratched his head. Are you saying that when you went in, the door was open? Yes, Komaeda Nagito confirmed. Detective Takagi immediately walked away from Komaeda Nagito, turned around to ask a colleague something, and then returned, his expression complicated. Komaeda-kun, the person who went in before you said that at that time, the door was closed. Kudo Shinichi, who had already visited the crime scene before the police, sighed, it must be a coincidence. Suddenly being interrupted by the elementary school student, Detective Takagi asked. Huh? Kudo Shinichi replied confidently, Senpai, cough, Komaeda ni heard a strange sound. It must be that the lock on the door was broken at that time, and with the lock no longer holding it in place, the wind blew the door open, allowing Komaeda ni to see the body directly when he passed by. Detective Takagi forced a smile. Ha, what an imaginative kid. Sounds like quite the coincidence, doesn't it? However, Komaeda Nagito completely believed in Kudo Shinichi's judgment, so that's how it is. Detective Takagi. He really wanted to shout, how can it be such a coincidence? Why are you believing a kid's nonsense? But his professional conduct kept him smiling awkwardly without voicing his frustrations. Alright, let's drop it for now. Komaeda-kun, why did you go in to check? I mean, if you heard a strange sound, wouldn't you ignore it instead of investigating? Komaeda Nagito thought about it, not really, mostly intuition. I thought there might be something unexpected happening. He said this while glancing at Kudo Shinichi. After all, there's a detective here. It feels more normal if something happens, right? This is a detective's fate. Detective Takagi. By detective, is he referring to Mori Kogoro? Do kids these days always talk so weirdly? Kudo Shinichi understood but was at a loss for words. Senpai is at it again. Why does he always look forward to cases happening when they are together? Even if I'm a detective, it's not like I'm solve cases every day. Detective Takagi, with a forehead full of question marks, asked all the necessary questions and went to report to Inspector Megure. Inspector Megure took the responses from the suspects and fell silent. This kid, Komaeda Nagito, why does he seem so suspicious? Everyone's answers were normal, but his was the weirdest. Anyway, the culprit should be among you five, Inspector Megure sighed. If you confess now, the punishment will be lighter. Of course, no one responded. Kudo Shinichi frowned, hiding behind Komaeda Nagito, carefully observing everyone's expressions. Suddenly, something came to Kudo Shinichi's mind. He pulled Komaeda Nagito aside to a corner and, with a serious expression, whispered, Senpai, did you do anything? Komaeda Nagito smiled. What do you mean by, did anything? Kudo Shinichi scrutinized Komaeda Nagito's expression. I mean, you didn't tamper with any evidence this time, did you? Kudo-kun, I told you before, that was a special situation. Kudo Shinichi let out a sigh of relief. That's good. There was an incident during an armed detective agency mission previously. He and Komaeda Nagito were in charge of investigating the scene, and after arriving, he felt that something was wrong. He eventually concluded that Komaeda Nagito had destroyed part of the evidence while he was talking to the victim's family. Upon discovering the truth, Kudo Shinichi felt a huge headache. Senpai, why did you do something like that? Because it was the victim's wish. Komaeda Nagito said back then with a serious and almost unsettling gaze. It was just a bit more for him to succeed, and I wanted to help him become Hope. The victim was a famous mystery writer. When Komaeda Nagito heard it was this author who died, he immediately expressed interest in coming along, which led to him and Kudo Shinichi teaming up. Thinking back, Kudo Shinichi realized that he should have been more cautious when his senpai showed interest in the deceased. After getting the destroyed clues from Komaeda Nagito, Kudo Shinichi finally deduced the truth. The deceased, a famous mystery writer, had disguised his suicide as a murder. The reason seemed to be that he wanted his death to become an unsolved mystery. This was inferred from the family's description. It was said he was terminally ill, so perhaps he wanted to use his final moments to toy with everyone. The author's son also admitted that the plan should have ended with him destroying some clues to make the case completely mysterious. But after seeing his father's body, he couldn't bring himself to do it, so he had to retreat before being discovered. For a reason like this, Kudo Shinichi could only sigh, and after solving the case, he received no thanks and left frustrated. What a pity, it was so close. Komaeda Nagito was still lamenting on the way back to the armed detective agency. If that author's son had followed through, the author's wish would have been fulfilled. Even the police hadn't figured it out. Kudo Shinichi frowned, this kind of thing. Even though killing oneself isn't against the law, Kudo Shinichi still didn't agree with it. As for his senpai, Kudo Shinichi was indeed impressed. Komaeda Nagito arrived 10 minutes before the police investigation team did. Not only did he discover crucial evidence, but he also deduced the victim's purpose and wishes, even going so far as to fulfill them. If it weren't for missing the optimal timing, it was uncertain whether the truth could have been revealed. Why couldn't Komaeda-senpai apply his incredible observational and action skills to a more proper, legitimate cause? Kudo Shinichi was quite troubled. But after all, Kudo-kun is still more amazing, To lose to Kudo-kun, the victim must be quite happy even in the afterlife, Komaeda Nagito said with a light tone. As expected of someone aiming to become a great detective. The collision between hope and hope is truly blinding. Kudo Shinichi. Senpai, you truly have no remorse, do you? In short, due to this whole experience, Kudo Shinichi was left with a psychological shadow, worrying that Komaeda Nagito, as the first to discover the victim, might casually handle something again. Komaeda Nagito solemnly promised, this time I really just took a glance and confirmed whether he was breathing before stepping back. Alright then. Kudo Shinichi, recalling what he had seen at the crime scene, decided to temporarily believe Komaeda Nagito. Can I ask you a few more questions? Of course. After asking Komaeda Nagito a few more questions, Kudo Shinichi, relying on his young age and being less conspicuous, went around gathering information from the police, eventually revealing a confident smile. He whispered something to Komaeda Nagito, who kept nodding, looking increasingly excited. After a while, Komaeda Nagito stood up and walked toward Inspector Megure. Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but I know who the culprit is. Everyone. Are you, the most suspicious person here, joking? Chapter 95 End.